Before modern pop-up tents and aluminum poles, soldiers fighting on the front lines had to withstand brutal weather with whatever they could assemble on short notice. Rain flooded trenches, winds tore canvas apart, and many early war camps collapsed under their own weight. Yet, tucked inside old field manuals and quietly passed between seasoned engineers, there was a rope anchoring system used during World War I that outperformed most tents, even in the worst storms. For the next minute, stay with me, because this technique reveals something deeper about military ingenuity. When tents failed, this rope system kept supply posts, medic stations and field shelters standing when everything else was blown flat. It wasn't a gadget, it wasn't expensive, and it didn't require a single metal pole. But it worked so reliably that soldiers in mountain, forest and coastal fronts kept using it well into the Second World War. How World War I engineers developed a rope-supported shelter that, well, actually outperformed traditional tents. The typical military tent of early World War I was a large canvas sheet supported by central poles and tensioned by stakes. In calm weather, this was enough. But in high winds, the poles became leverage points that twisted, snapped, or even tore right through the canvas. Engineers in the British and French armies, took a different approach based on mountaineering techniques already used in the Alps. Instead of relying on upright poles, they designed low-profile shelters supported entirely by tensioned ropes, using triangular load-bearing geometry. So, this system relied on, 3 or 4 anchor points: trees, sandbags, trenches, even old wagon wheels, and a tightly woven canvas, or ground sheet. The rope pattern you see spread the load evenly, which eliminated the weak spine you'd get with traditional tent poles. The result really was a shelter that sat low, resisted gusts from every direction and flexed instead of breaking. Soldiers who used it found that while tents often shredded in storms, the rope system simply tightened itself under pressure. Why the triangular load and countertension system made it stormproof? The advantage came from basic engineering that World War I soldiers learned on the battlefield rather than in classrooms. Triangular bracing does not deform easily, and when ropes were arranged in overlapping triangles, the shelter could absorb the force of wind or rain without collapsing inward. Instead of letting pressure concentrate on a single ridgepole, the load transferred through the ropes and into the ground. The downward pull of each rope countered the upward lift of the wind. The more the storm pushed, the more the system pulled itself together. German field notes from the Vosges region mentioned that rope shelters survived winds that uprooted small trees. They recorded that the system, held because it had nothing rigid to break. That principle made it one of the most dependable storm shelters used in the war. Speed mattered on the front lines, and the rope system was simple enough for 2 men to erect in just a few minutes. Soldiers spread their canvas on the ground, attached guy ropes at 3 corners, and then tightened them to whatever anchoring structure was available. When no natural anchors existed, They dug short trenches and buried improvised anchors such as rocks, bundles of sticks, or filled sandbags. Once tensioned, the shelter formed a wedge-shaped profile that allowed rain to run off but left no broad surface for wind to grip. The beauty of the system was its adaptability. Shelter entrances could be adjusted by moving a single rope. Height could be lowered by tightening the front anchor. If a rope frayed, it could be replaced instantly. And because the structure used no rigid poles, it packed flat and light, ideal for scouts, medics, and engineers who needed to stay mobile. Even when reinforced tents entered the battlefield later in the war, elite units and mountain troops still, preferred the rope system. It was quieter, nearly invisible from a distance, and far less likely to flap or collapse in sudden alpine storms. Field medics liked it because they could build shelters inside bombed-out buildings, between ruined walls, or in trenches where, honestly, poles simply wouldn't stand. The rope method also provided better ground stability in muddy conditions, where tents often sank or tilted as their poles loosened. The system reappeared in World War II manuals under the term compression-anchored ridge shelter, though, honestly, its function was closer to a rope tension web. Its simplicity kept it valuable, even as newer equipment became available. A survivalist, camper, or homesteader today can, replicate the method with modern materials. Start with a strong tarp, several lengths of rope, and 3 or 4 anchor points. Lay the tarp flat, secure one side low to the ground, then tension 2 ropes outward in opposite directions to create a firm triangular shape. The key is to keep everything low to the ground and fully tensioned. The lower the shelter, the less wind it will catch. This method works especially well in forests where natural anchors are plentiful. It also performs far better than standard tents in storms because it can flex and tighten rather than collapse. Another practical example is creating an emergency livestock or tool shelter in open fields. With no trees, bury improvised anchors or use weighted buckets filled with dirt. Tension your ropes, adjust the angle of the tarp, and you have a durable cover that can withstand heavy wind without frame failure. Preppers often use the same technique to stabilize greenhouses or off-grid structures during severe storms. Military history tends to focus on weaponry, but the survival techniques that kept soldiers alive were equally ingenious. The First World War rope system demonstrates how necessity, pressure, and field experience drive innovation. It represents the kind of practical knowledge that vanishes when technology advances but becomes essential again when equipment fails or, conditions deteriorate. Understanding these forgotten approaches gives us not only historical insight but also practical, real-world tools. If you want more forgotten techniques that shaped survival in history's toughest eras, subscribe to In the Beginning, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and help preserve these powerful lessons from the past.